Alright guys, I am out today, but we're still going to do some notes. Last night you should have learned all about committees with the online lecture on the committee system. And so today's bell work, I want you to take out your bell work, and I want you to answer these questions here. I'm going to give you a minute to get your bell work out so we can get going. Okay, so the questions are, what are committees? So what the heck are we talking about here? What do they do? Who are the members in the committees? Like, what's the ratio? Like, what party controls them? Who leads them? And how are those leaders selected? So this is kind of a test to see who did their online homework. So go ahead and get started. And again, I'm going to check back with you in a second. Go ahead and pause this video right now and just let it sit on the bell work. Okay, after a little while, I want you to turn to your neighbor and share your answers to the bell work question. Okay, so in regards to the bell work question, I hope that you got down that committees are in Congress, they're in the Senate, and they're in the House of Representatives, and what they do is they, basically when a law is introduced, it goes to a relevant committee. Like if the law has to do with solar panels, it'll go to the Energy Committee. And in that committee, let's say there's 12 people, they will study the law and they will decide what they're going to do with it. They'll make changes to it, they'll call down experts, they'll call down lobbyists, and they'll decide whether or not they even want to mess with the law, if they just want to ignore it. And anyway, committees they match Congress, so if right now Congress is more Republican, so the committees are exactly the same ratio, they're more Republican. The leaders of committees are the chairman, and those chairmen are selected by seniority system, and by that I mean person who has served on the committee the longest, not necessarily the oldest person. Okay, so we're going to do notes today. There was 2 handouts by the door. I hope you grabbed them. One handout is how a bill becomes a law, and one of them is like a graphic organizer type of thing. So today we're going to look into how does a bill become a law. As I do this lecture, please make sure you're pausing the video so that everybody can catch up and fill in their notes and nobody feels super rushed. Okay, a good place to start would be to watch that silly video you might have seen when you were a kid or like in 8th grade or elementary school. So sub, if you wouldn't mind, can you go to YouTube and type how a bill becomes a law and watch that 3-minute Schoolhouse Rock video on how a bill becomes a law. Okay, so let's get started. You should know that of all the bills introduced to Congress, only 10% actually passed, or less than 10% actually passed. So I think we looked it up, and Congress passed like, I don't know, 150, 200 laws last year. That means that, 2,000 or 3,000 were actually introduced, and only 150, 200 actually passed. A lot of ideas for laws come from the executive branch. And by that I mean the president, of course. And bills can start in either the House or the Senate, unless it's a tax bill. If it's a tax bill, where does it start? It always starts in the House. We know that, okay? And this process is very slow. Our founders designed it that way. And if you're going to have a bill pass, everything would have to go right. It's really easy for a bill to fail because there are many opportunities for a bill to fail, but it's really hard for a bill to pass because everything just has to go perfect. So, and this is the way that our founders wanted it. When you are passing a bill, there's a 2-step process for the bill. One is authorization, so it like allows for a program to exist. So if you're going to pass a bill about, let's put solar panels on every school in America. So one is like, okay, yeah, let's do that idea. And secondly is appropriation. I want you to go to the margin of your paper. I guess it's already a question on there. So I want you to answer the question, what is appropriation? Appropriation is spending money that you have. So appropriation would be the spending of the money needed for the solar panels. So today, when you go to lunch or when you go to dinner and you spend money, you are appropriating your money, okay? In order to pass a bill, you just need 51% of senators to vote yes on it. And 51% of the House to vote yes on it. So, just a brief explanation of how a bill becomes a law before I get into the next slide. Someone has an idea, maybe a congressman, maybe a citizen, and they submit that idea, and a congressman brings it down to Congress. They sponsor the bill, they introduce the bill, and Congress assigns it to a committee. And in that committee, that we're going to go to the next slide and see what they do. So in that committee, they have a few different options. And one thing you should know, again, is that most bills die in committee. And they don't die because they're killed. They die because they're pigeonholed. Look at this pigeon over here in a hole. Get it? Okay. Most bills die because they're pigeonholed. And what that means is that they just sit in a stack with other bills, and in the committee, no one ever talks about them. The committee has to send them out to the floor, otherwise they get stuck there. So anyway, what can happen when a bill goes to committee? It can pass, and the bill can be reported out to the House or Senate. It can be killed. They could say, we hate this bill. But remember, that doesn't happen a bunch. It can be changed and amended, and you can call down experts about the solar panels and make changes, and you could say, oh, well, we're only going to do it for high school, we're not going to do it for elementary school. You can make changes. And then it can be voted on. So the committee actually votes and says, should this bill go to the floor? But because the committees are mostly Republican, only Republican bills would make it to the floor. And then most of the time, you need to know that most of the time bills end up pigeonholed and they end up dying in committee because they just sit there and no one ever talks about them again. So if you're a congressman and you're frustrated because your bill is stuck in committee and it's not escaping and you feel like no one's ever going to do anything about it, you can file what is called a discharge petition. And a discharge petition, it allows the House, actually this is only in the House of Reps. Only in the House of Reps. And what you can do is it's like a vote amongst the people, like the entire House, to decide should the bill be removed from committee. Again, this is like a pretty uncommon thing. It doesn't happen that much, but it is an option according to the House rules. I've talked before about the Rules Committee. It's only in the House of Representatives. When I say Rules Committee, you say traffic cop. Sub, did they do it? Did they say it? Okay. If I say Rules Committee, you say? If I say traffic cop, you say Rules Committee. That's right. Okay. So in the House, there's this thing called the Rules Committee, and they decide what happens to bills. They're like the traffic cop. They tell the bills where to go, and they decide whether a bill will be open or closed. And do you remember we learned what that means? If a bill is open, changes can be made to it. If it's closed, then no changes can be made. And they establish how much time there will be to debate a bill, stuff like that. Okay, something that's kind of a deep, dark secret for Washington is that... How many of you guys have been to Washington, D.C. before? Who's been to the House of Representatives where you actually saw people, like the chamber where they vote on stuff? If it's anything like when I went there, you'll notice that barely anybody's there. For some reason, not a lot of people are actually there. They show up to vote on stuff. But when I went, there was just one guy talking to a TV camera, pretending like the room is full of people, and he's like, "I'm gonna fix America," and meanwhile, the whole chamber's empty. So, in other words, a lot of times there's not a lot of people at the House of Reps or the Senate, and there's this thing called the Committee of the Whole, and what it does is it allows for you to vote on a law if you're the House, but you don't have everybody there. So it requires 100 people to be there, and then they can vote on a law. On here we have a word that's pretty rare that you should know what it means. Maybe I want you to go to the margin of your paper and write the word quorum. Quorum. Quorum is like a minimum number of people required. So in this case, they need to have 100 people present if they want to vote on a law, even though everybody's not there. Okay, you learned this last night, but I'm going to give you a little refresher. Uh, a bill needs to pass both places, the Senate and the House of Representatives, if it's going to like become a bill and go to the president. It can't just pass one. And sometimes there are differences between the bill. I think 90% of the time, if the House passes a bill, the Senate passes the exact same bill, or they never pass anything. But sometimes, 10% of the time, the House will pass. For instance, this just happened with Trump's tax plan. The House passed a tax plan that was, had some differences. It goes to the Senate, and they did something a little bit different. So you end up with two different bills, Bill A and Bill B. But there's a lot of overlap. So there's probably like 80% similarity, but 20% difference. What's going to happen now is that it's going to go to conference committee. Okay, conference committee. A conference committee is made up of both Senate and House members. Maybe you should write that down. It has both Senate plus House members, and together they iron out the differences between the bill. So they're going to do this like today for this tax bill. They're going to sit down and try to iron out the differences and like Frankenstein it all into one big old bill. And then it has to go back to the House and back to the Senate, and they have to vote on this Frankenstein bill, and they're not allowed to make any changes. Okay? If at any time you guys are confused in the lecture, feel free to, tell the sub to go back if you're confused. Okay, what this is a graphic of how a bill becomes a law. Up here you have the Senate, and down here you have the House. I'm just gonna kind of walk you through it. I want you to pay attention because the next slide, you're going to be working on that graphic organizer that you grabbed when you came in. So, at very first, a bill is drafted, okay? Like someone writes it, maybe a congressman, maybe a person. But a congressperson has to bring it down to Congress and introduce it. They introduce it, and it gets a little bill number, okay? And I think they drop it in the hopper, it's called, and it gets a bill number. And then it goes to the appropriate committee, okay? Next up, it's going to go to the committee. And the committee's going to maybe have a hearing on it. 90% of the time, the committee's not going to do anything, and they're just going to ignore the bill. So they're going to have let's say this bill is going to be successful. They're going to have a hearing. They're going to mark it up, which means make changes. They're going to call down experts. They're going to get more information. They're going to decide what changes they want to make. And then they're going to report it out. Let's say in this case, they report it out favorably. They vote yes. They say we want to talk about it. And they do. Then it gets on the calendar for the House of Representatives to actually vote on it as a group. And then let's say that day arrives, and they read it on the floor, and they begin to debate the changes they might want to make. They do a full vote, and then all the meanwhile, at this point, that same bill will go over to the Senate, and the process starts all over again. And so it's really hard for a bill to do this twice, but let's say that it does. If there's any changes, it would go to the conference committee, it goes to the president, and then he can sign it, okay? So that's how a bill becomes a law, okay? Basically, the short version is someone writes a bill. They introduce it to Congress. It gets assigned to a committee. The committee decides they like it, and they do some investigation. They mark it up, they write on it, and then it goes to the opposite house so that they can work on it and sign it, and then it goes to the president, okay? Okay, in your notebook, or I'm sorry, when you came into the door, you grabbed a paper that looks like this, but it was blank. I want you to start down here, idea from constituent or lawmaker, and I want you to fill in yours. It's basically what I said. Someone has an idea. A bill is placed on the hopper. The bill is introduced in either the House or the Senate. It's studied in a committee. It's debated on the floor. It's approved and goes to the other house. Okay, so I want you to fill out your paper until it's completely filled up. Please do it in the right order. Don't screw it up. And check out the other side. If you're sitting around waiting for people to get done, look at the other side. The other side's really hard. It's a fill in the blank, or it's like you use the word bank to try to figure out the same steps, but in much more detail. We're going to do that when the notes are over. So when you can pause this video now, and when you're ready, unpause it so that we can finish up the notes. Okay, this is a super easy slide. I think we already kind of know. What can the president do when the bill gets to his desk? He can sign it and it becomes a law. He can veto the bill, which means he can say, I don't like it, I don't want to do it. But the House and Senate can vote 2/3 and make the bill become a law anyway. But that's really hard to do. It only happened one time to Obama. He can ignore the bill, and after 10 days, it automatically becomes a law. He can ignore the bill, and after 10 days, if Congress is adjourned, that means they're done for the year, then the bill gets pocket vetoed. So it's like a weird trivia, but I swear this comes up a bit, this pocket veto. So up here he can ignore a bill, and 10 days later it becomes a law, unless Congress is gone for the year, in which case it doesn't become a law. It just gets vetoed. Okay, I've talked a little bit about line item veto before. Who has the power of line item veto? State governors, that's correct. Way to go, Billy. Some state governors have the power of line item veto. To explain what this is again, if you're a president and you get a budget and it has like 1,000 items on it, line item veto would give you the power to cross off like a certain item and make it so like remove that item from a bill. They tried to give that power to the president in the 90s. They gave it to Bill Clinton, but the Supreme Court struck it down as a violation of the Constitution, which makes sense. It's probably too much power. Whose power did the Bill Clinton hurt by having line item veto? The answer is Congress's power. It's their job to allocate money. So if he's changing the money, that's kind of a constitutional violation. Okay, your notes don't really have any summary today, so don't worry about the summary. Here's what I want you to work on next. I want you to completely catch up with your study guide so that it's pretty much done. I mean, you can look at the end of it. Some of the questions are pretty easy, but check out the How a Bill Becomes a Law part of the study guide and answer that, in addition to any sections that come before. And then, honestly, I don't think that should take too long because I think your study guide is pretty up to date. So, the other thing I'm going to leave you with is that graphic organizer. The other side of it is like much harder, much more detailed. I want you to look at the other side of your graphic organizer where it how a bill becomes a law, and try your best. I'm going to go over the right answers next class, but try your best to fill in the boxes so that you can tell me, what's what. I will tell you that the letters on the left, they match up, I think is it the Senate, and the letters on the right match up with the House. So if that's any kind of clue to you, we'll go over the right answers next class because I know this is hard. Okay, but this is super important. I hope you're still listening. Homework tonight is to completely finish your vocab. Remember that we had done 15 words. Now I want you to do the rest of the words, 15 more. And then next class we're going to have a vocab test, so take the practice vocab test. Okay, I will text that out also. Okay, thank you for being engaged while I had a sub. Make sure your study guide gets caught up and you try your best to do the graphic organizer, the hard side. Cool, take it easy. See you Wednesday.